All right, we got a big one with the Eagles hosting the Commanders to go to the Super Bowl. And despite Jalen Hurts not being at 100%, why could we be in for one of his most dominant games via the A.J. Brown connection? Meanwhile, I get the latest updates on Dallas Goedert and Cam Jurgens injuries, and it's looking promising. However, Washington had a name pop up that would change the matchup dramatically if he can't go. So let's talk about that, what the commies have planned for Saquon, and how Jalen Carter will be a nightmare in the backfield. But first, let's run it. What's up, guys? We are almost there, the NFC Championship game. I mean, it doesn't get much bigger than this. And to those of you fortunate enough to be there this weekend, you were a part of history. Seriously, the Eagles and Commanders NFC Championship game in Philly isn't just the hottest ticket in town, but it's officially the most expensive NFC title game ever, coming in at an average cost of around $1,300 per ticket. And even though Jalen Hurts keeps it chill most of the time, he recognizes the importance of the home crowd against Washington.
The team feeds off of it. Everybody feeds off of one another, and I know that's something that we'll need this week going into a challenge, a big challenge in front of us. It's going to take the whole stadium, the whole city, and everybody being on the same page to come bring this thing home.
It is 100% all hands on deck this week. And after having Brian Dawkins at the game last weekend for the Rams, the Eagles decided to bring that BDN energy to the title game, as Philly announced that Nick Foles will be the honorary captain and bring those positive vibes. Okay, yes, you're technically right that Nick Foles was the honorary captain when the Birds played Atlanta earlier this season, and yeah, they lost there, but again, this is the NFC Championship game we're talking about. Just saying, I don't know that it gets much better than a dude who threw for 352 yards and 3 touchdowns as the Eagles ended up routing the Vikings by a score of 38-7 back in 2017. Now, personally, I think it's going to be a little bit closer than that, but I'm still really confident, so let's do this. Let's put some positive vibes out there. Do me a favor and drop a like on this video. Because if we can get this video to 4,000 likes and the Eagles beat the commies, I'll give away a signed Saquon Barkley helmet to one lucky subscriber. And come on, with number 26 only 148 yards away from breaking Terrell Davis's all-time single-season rushing record, which is for the regular season and the playoffs, by the way, getting a piece of that history would be pretty sweet. Although Saquon's got a point that while it is cool, there's really only one thing that matters.
It would be amazing. It's something that, I guess helps with the legacy play, like with my name and being mentioned, what I want to do, what I want to accomplish in this game. But that doesn't happen if we don't take care of what we got to take care of this Sunday. So focusing more on that, and I'm aware of what the record is and how close I am. But like I said, win and move on. That's the only thing. That's the only thing that's important. Numbers don't matter.
All right, you know what? Forget what I said about the numbers thing. If the Eagles win, I will give away a signed Saquon Barkley helmet to one lucky subscriber. And by the way, I'd say the chances are looking pretty good for that dub, though, after some Commanders fans decided to make the mistake of defiling the Rocky statue ahead of the game.
Well, some folks got to learn the hard way.
I mean, I don't know how stupid you have to be to go messing with the Rocky statue, but again, every team that has done this, they've gone home empty-handed, so again, we know how this movie ends, but, when will people learn? Like everyone keeps doubting Jalen Hurts, with Ryan Clark going so far to say Jalen Hurts injuring his legs is like Patrick Mahomes injuring his arm, while also leaving no doubt as to where his confidence is in the NFC title game.
Think about the amount of times this team goes for it on 4th down. It's because of Jayden Daniels, and you look at both of these games and how many of their touchdowns have come on drives where they've taken the extra down to give them another series. But the other piece about Jayden Daniels is this. It's not just his poise. It's not just his composure. It's the output, right? It's the production. It's the success. It's the ability to operate a very complex offense that sometimes doesn't even get in the huddle because he can direct and put people where they need to be along with the football. What we've seen him do is amazing, and I believe because of him, they can take the next step and become a Super Bowl team.
Again, you're telling me Jayden Daniels is going to go into Philly with the Rocky curse, despite all that, and still win?
I like you, but you're crazy.
Look, I know everyone wants to crown him already, and he's no doubt going to be a handful. Yet it's amazing for a 14-3 team to be receiving so much doubt nationally like the Eagles are. Of course, sure, it's not everyone, and Bill Belichick isn't so sure Washington will be able to ground the Birds.
They're a hard offense to stop. They've got a great offensive line. They're well coached. They're very good. I think in the end, probably what Washington wants to do is force Hurts to beat him and not let Barkley beat him, and that's easier said than done.
And a first down, and a ton more. Barkley Barkley carries it 20 times per game. Has room, and there he goes. Saquon Barkley.
Does he have another one? Yes, he does.
See, that's what it is right there. You can bottle him up for a little while, but it's impossible to shut down Saquon. For example, in the first matchup, the Birds couldn't get much of anything going on the ground, until finally, late in the game, Saquon was able to find creases and put the game on ice. Whereas in the second meeting, it was actually most of his damage that he did in the first quarter and not much after that. Granted, yes, the argument of whenever Jalen Hurts went out, then you have Kenny Pickett in there, it negates the running game, it's a totally valid point. Although the question this week becomes that same focus since Jalen Hurts injured his knee against the Rams. And after multiple practices and video clips surfaced, it's pretty evident that QB1 isn't close to 100%. Plus, for the record, he said he also anticipates wearing a brace, and I think that says all you need to know in terms of how significant it is that he needs a brace. Which is probably why the Commanders have made it clear they have plans to sell out for Saquon. Yet at the same time, we'll be targeting Jalen Hurts if he ever decides to run. And when asked about Kami's DC Joe Whitt's comments, Jalen wasn't fazed.
Every game is different, and every game there's always an intent out there on the other side of the ball, but ultimately you want to make it about what you do and just go out there and play clean ball.
This really feels like one of those games to get Jalen in a rhythm early passing the football. I know, we're still a run-first football team, but it would just shut everyone up if Jalen came out and had one of those games like he did against Pittsburgh earlier this season. Remember when all the national pundits were saying there's no way Philly could win if Saquon got bottled up? Except then, Jalen went out there and did just that, throwing for 290 yards and 2 touchdowns as the Eagles handily beat the Steelers. Look, I'll just say it. I wouldn't be surprised if we see that type of game from QB1. Heck, you got the whole squad showing a little emotion when asked about the criticism of their quarterback.
I couldn't give. I just want to apologize. I'm sorry. I couldn't give a rat's ass about whatever anybody says outside this building. It ain't going to help us win championships, and that's our goal.
This year, I think he's been doing an incredible job of not turning the ball over, making really good decisions. I know he get grilled for it sometimes, but he's been doing a great job. And we're going to need him to keep doing a great job.
By the way, the Eagles did get some really good news when it comes to the injury report, since after missing multiple practices, both starting center Cam Jurgens and tight end Dallas Goedert were back at practice and getting in reps, which is no doubt a sigh of relief because of how vital they are in all phases, but, most importantly, the running game. Yet let's be real, when asked about it, Dallas wasn't ever missing this game.
Going to the Super Bowl 2 years ago, going into the season last year, having high expectations and kind of falling short, it just kind of built a little bit of hunger in all of us. We got, not very often do you have a team with as many superstars, as many great players as this, and we definitely want to take advantage of it. We're all hungry for more, and we got the team to do it, so we just have to make sure we go out there and play our best football on Sunday.
Let's go. Really, really positive there. Granted, if you look at the injury report, it does say questionable for Cam Jurgens, but the thought around the entire team is that he's for sure playing. It's actually the neck injury for Britton Covey that's a little bit surprising since the Eagles opened up his practice window. And the initial consensus had been that he'd be taking over punt return duties. But clearly that won't be happening, so the Birds will stick with Cooper DeJean handling that role and his role in the slot. And then as for Washington, they're not without some of those blemishes either, although they did let everyone know Bobby Wagner is a full go after only getting a limited practice due to an ankle on Friday. But the bigger cue, though, from a lot of people is what's going on with Kami's defensive tackle Daron Payne. Because despite having an incredibly gruesome finger injury he's been dealing with, last week he practiced in a limited capacity and then ended up playing against Detroit. However, this week he didn't get in a single practice and is now listed as questionable. Now, personally, I still think that he ends up playing, but it is at least noteworthy or raising some eyebrows to say he didn't get a single practice. I mean, not even a limited session on Friday. You would assume he'd at least come out there and do that. Again, he's questionable. If you would have had to say, hey, is he going to play? What do you think? I would say yes, you plan on that, but we'll keep you posted. Again, to the line of thinking that he plays, it seems definitely like that, especially with how he was talking ahead of the game.
We've been the underdogs all year. There's a lot of games people go into thinking we won't win, so we just go out and play our hardest, and we know if it's going to be a dogfight, then we might come out on top.
How we feeling? Like, if he couldn't go, it obviously makes life a whole lot easier on Saquon, but still think that he ends up going there. Like I said, keep those notifications turned on. I will make sure to update everyone if anything breaking happens there. But then as for the whole dogfight mentality, I'm sorry, bro, but like if it turns into that situation, I'm definitely taking Jalen Carter and the Philly Dogs. Because honestly, for me, this thing on defense is about Jalen Carter. Heck, you got the guaranteed Hall of Famer Aaron Donald saying JC's that next guy who can take over as him as the dude to wreck a game at any point. And yeah, everyone's seen that this season with the Breadman recording career highs in tackles for loss, quarterback hits, and passes defended while logging 4.5 sacks and 2 forced fumbles. which, by the way, is for an Eagles defense that ranked number 1 in defensive efficiency, while JC was doubled more than 50% of the time. But even as impressive as that is, it's honestly what JC does behind the scenes and in the film room that's more impressive. Since, like Brooks Cabina of The Athletic shared, after a lousy practice earlier in the season, JC called out the guys in the players-only huddle saying where we are is not where we need to be. And ever since that moment, as we've seen, the defense flipped a switch and became the most dominant defense Philly's seen in a long time. Now, I don't know if this is that whole incident we heard about during the bye week, the defense coming together and playing a whole lot better, but regardless, JC having a voice in that locker room, you can tell it pays dividends. Go watch the mic'd up clip against the Rams. I mean, his work with Nolan Smith, it's insane. Then couple that with the fact that the Washington Commanders will be without Sam Cosmi, and I'm absolutely going to pick Jalen Carter in one of my parlays with Underdog. And I would highly recommend that you do that too, because right now when you scan the QR code or just click the link in the description and use code PhillySpecial, Underdog will give you a special pick in the lobby along with up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Of course, y'all know I'm not going to stop you. If you pick Nolan Smith, that's also a very good bet, especially playing against the Commies. He's had sacks in each game. And as we've seen, Washington's Brandon Coleman is just a sack waiting to happen if you watch the tape. But here we go. For my official plays this week, I took a long look at this. The Eagles are not going to shy away from the run game. So give me Kenny Gainwell over 2.5 attempts, plus the bread man to get a sack like I was talking about. You could flip that with Nolan Smith. I'm having a very hard time. I'm going to take a separate play with Nolan Smith there. And then I'll take Austin Eckler over 2.5 receptions. I mean, he had 8 in the last matchups against Philly, so 2.5 over that feels like very likely. Again, get signed up with code PhillySpecial because as the official sponsor of the channel, you won't find any better deals or promos anywhere else. And by the way, I know a lot of you were saying you can't play the pick'em games based on your location, which is a fair point. However, when you go with their draft leagues option, it opens up to a ton more locations. And probably not surprising, but with the playoffs in full swing, they're paying out some of the highest payouts to the person who's able to draft the top lineup. So like I mentioned before, it's literally just like fantasy football. It's for the playoffs. I know a lot of you are used to it, but just for those that are not, very easy, very simple. I have one more money on that than I have to pick them, as I've also said. But again, make sure to scan the QR code, use code PhillySpecial, get up to $1,000 in bonus cash, or just click the link in the description. All right, the other one I thought about picking but decided not to was A.J. Brown receptions. Although according to Johnny Page, maybe I should have gone that route, with Johnny breaking down the film and believing A.J. could be in for a huge game. Since for one, Washington isn't afraid to play man coverage, and A.J. absolutely torched Marshawn Lattimore in their last matchup. Remember, there were multiple pass interference penalties, so AJ's 8 for 97 would have been a lot more had Lattimore not held. Plus, it's also a fair point that AJ only having 3 catches for 24 yards through 2 games means he's probably due for a breakout. So I'm not worried about him at all, but I am curious and not to have bad vibes out there necessarily. But if there's one area, the biggest concern that you have, think about it, take a little bit of time, but the one area, the biggest concern that may hold this team back this upcoming game, what is it? And while you're answering that in the comments, for me, I'll just say it's special teams again. I know, I say it a lot of weeks, but let's not forget that in their last matchup, the Eagles were nearly giving the Commies the ball at midfield every time. Now, the good news to that is that Jake Elliott is doing kickoffs now, so hopefully we don't see those massive returns like we did in Washington. And then when it comes to the kicking game, technically Jake is still perfect in the playoffs for field goals. However, I do have a little concern about leaving points on the board with those missed PATs. Anyway, having said that, and with so much on the line this weekend, I had to sit down with the Eagles writer Anthony DeBona to get his thoughts there, the biggest areas to exploit, plus the thoughts on Slay's last game at the Linc.
Potential last game at the Linc, for people that did not see that, there was a report that came out that, Slay has been considering, how much longer he's going to play, maybe play next year, but even if he does, possibly not in Philly. So, yeah, the idea that this could be his final game at the Linc. Any thoughts on that long-term, I guess, or short-term impact without Slay?
Well, going back to just last offseason, it seemed like he had both feet out of the door. It seemed like he was about to sign with the Ravens.
Yeah.
And then they ended up bringing him back. He said that Big Dom gave him a call and said, listen, we need you, or whatever it was, to kind of rein him back in. But just looking how the Eagles have drafted over the last couple of years, and even claiming a guy like Isaiah Rodgers, and then you have Keely Ringo, Cooper DeJean, obviously Quinyon Mitchell. So they've kind of been, it seems like they're kind of gearing up, and I know Isaiah Rodgers is going to be a free agent. So maybe they kind of prioritize after seeing how he stepped up in place of Slay. I think if Slay does move on, and given his contract next season, that's been something that people have talked about all season long, is that we're not entirely sure if he's going to return at that salary. So if he's not willing to restructure or kind of take a team-friendly deal to stick around in Philadelphia, then maybe he will finally go to the Ravens or somewhere else on a 1-year deal to kind of finish out his career. But, he stepped up big time down the stretch for the Eagles, and I feel like he's another player that doesn't really get the credit that they deserve, and he's playing really well. I know the numbers might not have looked too great from last week, but he was targeted an obscene amount of times and had a ton of huge pass breakups and things like that. So I think if he does return, great. If he doesn't return, it seems like the Eagles kind of have a contingency plan in place and they're ready to move forward without him.
In terms of this game coming up, you always take a good look at, Eagles areas to take advantage of, Eagles areas for maybe some concern, all that. What are a couple, maybe 2 or 3 matchups that you see first off for strengths or opportunities in this third, what we call it, a grudge match, I guess, with the Commanders coming up?
So I feel like the biggest one that's kind of been talked about all week long is going to be Jalen Carter versus the Washington backup guard, Trent Scott. So I think people have kind of overreacted a little bit to the absence of Sam Cosmi because I think Trent Scott played relatively well given the situation that he was put in against Detroit. But overall for the entire season when he has to step in, he's played pretty well. But it's just Jalen Carter's a whole different beast. I mean, now Aaron Donald's comparing him to himself, and he's really feeling himself. He's putting it all together as far as like what he can do physically, and now his like the mental aspect of the game. We saw it last week where he worked that stunt and called it out with Nolan Smith and got a sack for himself. So just it's going to be a long day for that Washington offensive line. And unfortunately, Jayden Daniels is really good as far as making plays under pressure, and especially when he's blitzed, like he can create like really nobody else can in the NFL with his legs as well. So it's going to be a tough challenge for the Eagles, but that matchup's definitely going to be one to watch. And then flip to the other side of the ball. Obviously, Saquon Barkley's had his way with Washington this season, but it dates back to his time with the Giants as well, because according to NFL Next Gen Stats, Saquon Barkley averages 137.5 scrimmage yards per game against Washington in his career, which is actually the second most all-time against a single opponent in NFL history, with a minimum of 10 games played against that team. So this is not just Barkley on the Eagles dominating Washington. He's done it for his entire career in the NFL. The other player, unfortunately, was Jim Brown, who averaged 147.9 total scrimmage yards, and it was against the Eagles. So Barkley's had his way with Washington, so I think he could be due for another huge game, especially if Jalen Hurts has hobbled a little bit. I think Barkley, we've seen it where even if he just gets 2-3 yards here and there, the Eagles and Kellen Moore kind of stick with the run, and eventually he breaks one free and gets one of those 50, 60-yard touchdowns that we've kind of become spoiled by seeing in Philadelphia. And then the third one, I think, is kind of a little bit slept on, and it wasn't really talked about as far as their last matchup, where people talked about the absence of Jalen Hurts once he got concussed, and then obviously when C.J. Gardner-Johnson went down. But Dallas Goedert didn't play in that game either. And if you go back to the first matchup, he had a big role where he was tied for the team lead in receptions. He had 5 receptions for 61 yards. So he also had a 32-yard catch against Frankie Louvu, who Eagles fans love to hate. So I think Dallas Goedert could be in for a big game. He's had some big catches so far in the postseason, and I would look for that to continue against Washington.
Man, I love that. That's a fantastic point. It's sometimes just overlooked at the point of like, okay, who was there, who was available for the game, and we've seen the impact as you mentioned there, Dallas Goedert and what he brings. It's not only you see big plays that he makes against the Rams, how he can be there, but also in blocking. And when he's on the field, I mean, the efficiency with the run blocking, with the running game is so much better. I mean, it's number one by a mile versus you're kind of like that top 5 range whenever he's not there. As you talk about too, with just the Grant Calcaterra differences, he's solid in a serviceable role, I suppose. But there's a difference whenever Dallas Goedert's out there. So the fact that he is able to play, the ankle injury coming off that, full practice on Friday and should be good to go, is a huge impact. But yeah, I keep looking at this one and I'm saying to myself, like, if there was ever a moment, and we got to see it, and I know the Eagles lean into the run game, but if there was ever a moment for Jalen Hurts to silence the critics, to go out there and to just prove a point and be like, look, Washington is trying to, I know teams have said that they're going to do it, like they try to, they go out there like, hey, we're going to limit Saquon. Teams try, they've not been able to for the most part. There's been maybe the Steelers kind of bottling them out. The Browns game wasn't great. Still not the worst case scenario in terms of what he's able to do. But even if that's the case there, like if Washington sells out and like, no, well, you know what, Jalen, you could just take it. You could throw the football. You can sit there in the pocket. You could do whatever you want to, but you're not going to hand it off to Saquon and you're not going to take off and run. This would be one of those games that Jalen Hurts can do. And I know he's had the comment earlier of like the 275 plus and 3 touchdowns. I don't know that I'm going to that extreme, but do you see this as a Jalen Hurts having to rely a little bit more in the passing game because of the injury to his knee? Or do you still think it's like, you know what, Eagles, we don't care that you're going to try to load the box and make sure we can't run. We're still going to win just via that route?
I mean, I feel like if it ain't broke, then like don't fix it. Like it's just like they know what Saquon Barkley can do, and the Washington kind of tried to load up and stop him the first couple of times they played. They had success, obviously, once Jalen Hurts left the game, but just the threat of Jalen Hurts with his legs, which is why I would look for them to do that early, where they're kind of just letting Jalen Hurts run a little bit here and there, just to keep that threat alive, where the Washington doesn't have to just completely ignore him as far as running the ball. So if they can do that early, establish that Jalen Hurts, even with his hobbled knee, is still of a threat on the ground, I think that would be super important. But it's just like the Commanders, especially the entire season, they've really struggled as far as stopping the run. I mean, they've allowed the second highest explosive run rate at 13.2%, and they've allowed the most yards before contact per rush at 1.9 yards per carry to running backs this season. So it's not just Saquon Barkley that's had his way against the Washington defense. We saw Jahmyr Gibbs dominate them last week, even though they lost the game, but he had his way with them. And then all season long, it seems like they've been having trouble stopping running backs. And obviously, Saquon Barkley's the best in the league right now as far as running backs go. So I just think you kind of rely on him. If that means Jalen Hurts just only has 150 passing yards again, 100, whatever it is, then so be it. But I think the most important thing for Jalen Hurts is just going to be being efficient with the football, not having any interceptions, not having any fumbles, not taking any unnecessary sacks and holding the ball too long, which has kind of been a problem all season long for him, where the longer he holds the ball, it seems like the worse the play result ends up being. So if he can just be efficient with the football, I think they'll be fine. And eventually Saquon Barkley will break off a big run and carry them to victory.
I do think that it's you're looking at the line to start the week was like 21.5 for Saquon's longest rush, and it very quickly shot up. It's like 25.5, 26.5. So, understandably, you're like, you can bottle him up for a little while, but eventually he does break one, as you talk about those explosive plays allowed for Washington. And we've seen it in every game this season against them. We've seen it a number of times. Detroit also with Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, it's just, you feel like that's certainly an area. I don't know. I kind of go back and forth. Like, do I think that Jalen Hurts can do that or will do that? I think that he can, but we'll see. I mean, if they bottle up the run game early, maybe they adjust. But you get Cam Jurgens. Hopefully that the full complement, healthy O-line, take advantage there. I don't know. Go back and forth. But I guess in terms of the other side, and we look at Eagles' concerns, weaknesses, whatever we want to call them. If you're looking at these matchups here, what are 2, 3 maybe areas on the flip side for that?
I mean, this isn't necessarily a weakness, but I've talked about it last week, like I said, when I predicted the Commanders win, but just the greatness, unfortunately, of Jayden Daniels. And you can't really prepare for a guy like that as far as his ability to make plays out of structure and with his legs, because just like it seems like when you have him dead to rights, he makes a play, and he had that huge 4th down conversion against the Eagles last time where it seemed like they had to stop, but then he used his speed and his legs and he was able to convert it. So it's just going to be difficult. I don't really know necessarily what the answer is as far as stopping him. I feel like ideally the Eagles shouldn't blitz. They should just try and get as much pressure as they can with 4 defenders, kind of utilize a lot of zone coverage where you're not turning your back and running with a guy in coverage. You can kind of still keep your eyes on Jayden Daniels and see what's in front of you and kind of keep him honest that way. I don't know if they're necessarily going to use a quarterback spy on him, because then again, that's one less guy that you have to utilize in coverage. So I think just being disciplined as far as rushing with 4 guys. You could still be creative like Vic Fangio has with the simulated pressures where they're dropping Nolan Smith or Josh Sweat or Jalix Hunt into coverage and then bringing a guy like Zach Baun or Oren Burke. So you can kind of do that and throw him off a little bit. I think Cooper DeJean even had a blitz last week. So just doing something like that to mix things up and kind of throw different looks at him, but also kind of being disciplined and not getting frustrated, because it seemed like Vic Fangio even said that himself, where he was like, listen, the 4-man rush wasn't working. So that's why we sent 5 or 6 rushers the last time. But that came back to bite them, because I think Jayden Daniels had completed 9 of 11 passes for 143 yards and 2 touchdowns. It just wasn't working. They had answers to it. They can throw the ball efficiently deep very well. So the Eagles just need to be disciplined. And I think blitzing is not the answer against them. But flipping to the other side of the ball, I talked about it before, but I think Jonathan Allen is playing really, really well. I mean, it didn't seem like he was even going to return this season. But then last week he had 7 pressures against Detroit. And they're one of the better offensive lines in the league, and he kind of had his way with them. And we've seen in recent weeks where the interior, especially of the Eagles' offensive line, the communication's kind of been off. They've allowing a little bit more pressures than we've become accustomed to. So I think the interior 3 offensive linemen for the Eagles, especially if Cam Jurgens is banged up, them against Jonathan Allen is going to be a matchup to watch for. That could make things a little bit interesting for Jalen Hurts, especially if they can get pressure with just a couple guys and they're able to drop a lot more defenders in coverage. That would force Jalen Hurts to kind of hold the ball, and we've seen what happens then. So watch out for Jonathan Allen kind of blowing things up in the middle of that defensive line.
Yeah, it's definitely the go back and forth. Daron Payne, the finger injury. Are they able to play in tandem there? Does he not play? Is he limited? But certainly, yeah, with Jonathan out, I didn't think he would be back. And whenever it's like, oh yeah, hey, there's going to be a return. A couple. It's like, all right, well, it definitely needed, very much so for the Commanders on their side. So makes a significant impact this late in the year. One of those that is a big time key to watch. And speaking of, because as we have the loyal viewers, listeners, as we had a second ago also mentioned, but people take the place and picks and, sometimes win some decent money, of course, to gamble responsibly. But as always, we got to go with the first touchdown score, the pick there. Do you have anybody in mind for this game? You did get, I know you hit the one with Brian Robinson the first time in Philly. I'm trying to remember, did you hit the one with Washington, correct? Or I can't remember who you went with on that one.
I don't remember if I did or not. I feel like we've been making so many of them that I kind of lose track. I remember I hit on Brian Robinson, Kyron Williams, Mark Andrews. I don't know who else besides that.
Okay, you had you definitely had like four.
I got Tower Higbee right last week, but he wasn't the first one. He was the first scorer for the Rams.
That's true. That's
but
true.
He was
close.
Unfortunately, so.
But you could take both, right? That's what we said. If you take both eventually. I mean, you're gonna hit
take any time
more
take
often than not. So
yeah,
you'd be good. This week though, first touchdown score. Who are you going with?
I mean, this is going to be upsetting a few people again, probably because I'm going with the opponent, but I have Zach Ertz scoring the first touchdown of the game. I think he's kind of been their red zone weapon. He scored a touchdown the last time or in week 11 against the Eagles. He's been on fire recently. He has a touchdown in 3 of his last 4 games and 6 of his last 8 games. So he's been kind of Jayden Daniels' go-to guy. He hasn't put up a ton of yards, but if they get close to the red zone, I feel like Ertz is their guy that Daniels has kind of leaned on. So if the Eagles continue their trend of if they win the coin toss, they defer, I could see Washington kind of getting a quick drive to start the game, getting into the red zone, and Zach Ertz kind of getting it started. But it feels like literally a flip of the coin because if the Eagles were to start with the ball, I'd probably say Saquon Barkley, which is kind of a chalky pick. But I'm going to go with Zach Ertz and maybe get a little people upset.
It's a little bit of a chalky pick if you go with Saquon. I'm going to go with, this is funny that you say Ertz. I'm going to go with Dallas Goedert. So we're going to take, it's at one point, obviously both Eagles before Ertz went off to Arizona and kind of became a little bit forgotten, and then his resurgence in Washington is like turn back the clock. But I'm going to say Dallas Goedert. Ertz's replacement, get an Eagles touchdown, Eagles tight end. Goedert, the ankle injury, but I think we saw definitely coming back from the injury. He's been a vital piece. He's been used a number of times. So give me a Dallas Goedert first-time touchdown. That's what I roll with there. And then, of course, as always, we do need to pick the score predictions and see where we're going at there. Is there a little closer game this week? You feeling last week, there's an opportunity, a chance perhaps if the Eagles were to blow out the Rams. It came down to a nail-biter, obviously. But this week, score predictions, what you got?
So I don't have it being a double-digit victory for the Eagles, but I have them winning still relatively convincingly. I have the Eagles winning 33-24 over the Commanders and advancing to play the Buffalo Bills in the Super Bowl.
There we go. Game time is right around the corner, and I could not be more hyped. Reminder, me and Thomas will be there this weekend, probably in the M&K lots for tailgating. So if you see somebody in an A.J. Brown or DeVonta Smith jersey, that's probably us. Do me a favor. Hit a like if you haven't already on this video. Make sure to subscribe. Turn the notifications on. And also, let's hear those score predictions in the comments. I'm going to say 31-20 Birds. This has been the Philly Special.